They say every small town hides its secrets, but in Laurelwood, secrets don't just hide, they breathe. Behind every curtain, there's a whisper. Behind every smile, a memory too loud to forget. In towns like this, people remember who you were and pretend not to see who you've become. For Claire Monroe, Laurelwood was home. Quiet streets, familiar faces, morning coffee from the same bakery since she was 16. 32 now, a literature teacher at the local high school. Thoughtful, precise, the kind of person who always seemed composed, even when she wasn't. Her husband, James, was the good kind of predictable, the kind you marry when you're tired of chaos. He loved spreadsheets, jogging at 6 a.m., and watching movies he'd already seen. Claire thought that kind of life would be enough, until a leaky faucet sent her to the hardware store, and the past she thought she buried smiled back. The classroom smelled faintly of old books and lavender hand lotion. Claire stood at the whiteboard, her handwriting elegant, as she slowly wrote, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant." Behind her, students whispered. Someone dropped a pencil. She didn't turn around. Her eyes lingered on the quote, not for the students, but for herself. Truth, slant, misdirection. Her thoughts drifted, not to poetry, not to lesson plans, but to the dream she had the night before. The lake, a voice she hadn't heard in years. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She picked it up. A message from James. "Lunch today? I miss you." She stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered. Then she typed, "Of course," followed by a smiley face. The safe kind, the married kind. She put the phone down and turned back to the class. "Let's talk about truth," she said, her voice calm. But something behind her eyes cracked. They always came to the same diner. The red booths, chipped mugs, and lemon pie James never finished. Claire sipped her coffee slowly. Across from her, James adjusted his tie even though it wasn't crooked. "You've been quiet lately," he said, voice light but probing. "Everything okay at school?" Claire nodded too quickly. "Just tired," she answered. "Kids are restless, gradings endless." He smiled, warm, familiar. "I thought maybe we could take a weekend. That cabin near the hills. Remember that place?" Claire smiled back. It was a reflex now. "Sure," she said. "That sounds nice." But in her mind, the idea felt distant, like remembering a photograph from someone else's life. The silence returned. Not awkward. Worse, practiced. The silence of people who knew how to be together, but had forgotten why. The bell over the door rang, sharp, echoing. Claire stepped inside, list folded in her pocket, trying to remember the difference between a washer and a valve. She turned a corner and froze. Sawdust in the air, the low sound of a hammer tapping. Ryan Carter, taller than she remembered, sleeves rolled, hair messy in a way that looked accidental, but probably wasn't. "Claire Monroe," he grinned, wiping his hands. "Didn't think you still lived here." Her breath caught. "You're still in town?" "Just moved back," he said. "Family stuff." He looked at her like no time had passed. She looked at him like too much had. "You've changed," she said. "You look like someone who builds things and never writes back. And you look like someone who grades papers by candlelight." They both laughed, a little too hard, a little too long. He helped her find a faucet kit. She didn't need help, but didn't stop him either. At the door, she hesitated, turned once to glance back. He was watching her. Something stirred, something that had been sleeping for years. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, gentle ripples moving like breath across its surface. Claire sat on the dock, legs crossed, Ryan beside her, younger, wilder, scared of nothing but himself. "It's so quiet," she whispered. "Scary quiet." Ryan leaned back on his elbows. "It's peaceful," he said. "No one watching." "Except you," she teased. "Always watching." He turned, slowly, seriously. "I could kiss you right now," he said. She froze. Not because she didn't want it, but because she did. "Then why don't you?" she asked. He looked at her for what felt like minutes. "Because if I do, everything changes." He leaned in, then stopped. She stood up, walked away. Neither of them said another word. but both remembered, forever. Claire lay on her side, eyes wide open, staring into the dark. James was beside her, breathing deep and steady, the way he always did after 2 chapters of a thriller novel. Her phone was on the nightstand. She reached for it, slowly. One message. Unknown number. Didn't expect to see you today. You looked beautiful. She sat up, heart tight in her chest. Her fingers hovered. She could delete it, pretend it never happened. But she didn't. Instead, she turned off the screen, placed the phone face down, and stayed sitting. Awake, listening to her heartbeat. Wood dust floated in sunbeams like snow suspended midair. Claire stepped inside, holding a broken lamp in both hands. Ryan looked up. This lamp's a disaster, he said. Looks like it's been through a war. Or a marriage, she joked. He raised an eyebrow. Too dark, she smiled. A little, he said, grinning. He took the lamp, studied it. I'll fix it. Like old times. Claire leaned on the bench, her face half in shadow. Were we ever whole? Ryan's eyes met hers, unblinking. I never stopped wondering, he said, his voice low. What would have happened if I'd kissed you that night? She looked down, then up. I think about it too. And there it was again. That silence, thick, electric, like thunder that hadn't landed yet. Megan stirred her latte aggressively. So, she said, what's his name? Claire blinked. Excuse me. Claire. Megan leaned in, voice low. I've known you since we both thought eyeliner was personality. You've got that look, the dangerous one. Claire laughed, nervously. There's no name. Just nostalgia. Oh, Megan smirked. The worst kind. Claire looked out the window. It's not like that. Megan sipped her drink. It never is. Until it is. So what's his name again? The engine hummed, a dull counterpoint to the thrumming in Claire's ears. Ryan, she whispered, testing the name on her tongue. It tasted like possibility, and a regret she hadn't realized she was carrying. The drive home felt longer than usual, each familiar landmark passing by as if seen through a distorted lens. The bakery, the park where she'd read countless books, the old movie theater now boarded up. They were anchors to a life that suddenly felt less stable. She thought of James, his easy smile, the comfortable rhythm of their days. He was a good man, a safe harbor. But safe wasn't exciting. Safe wasn't Ryan's eyes, burning with unspoken questions. She pulled into her driveway, the house dark and quiet. A single light was on in the living room. James, probably watching one of his predictable movies. She sat in the car for a moment longer, the engine off, the silence amplifying the tumultuous beat of her own heart. The glow of her phone screen lit up the dashboard. Another message. From Ryan. Lamp's almost done. There's a new coffee shop downtown. Maybe tomorrow. Claire stared at it, a knot forming in her stomach. Her thumb trembled, hovering over the keyboard. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with sawdust. Claire walked in, and Ryan looked up, a smile spreading across his face. Right on time, he said, holding out a mug. The lamp sat on his workbench, gleaming, looking better than new. It's perfect, she said, her voice a little breathless. He shrugged. Just needed a little care. Their eyes met, and the air thickened, charged with an unspoken understanding. About that coffee shop, Ryan began, clearing his throat. It's nice. Quieter than the diner. Claire nodded. Sounds good. He hesitated, then leaned against the workbench. You know, I thought about that night at the lake for years. Why we didn't. Claire looked away, fiddling with the strap of her purse. We were kids. Scared. Or smart, Ryan mused. Or stupid. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. What if we weren't? Claire's gaze flickered back to his. His eyes were intense, searching. The distance between them felt electric, shrinking with every beat of her heart. She wanted to move, to speak, but her feet were rooted, her throat tight. Dinner was quiet, the clinking of forks against plates echoing in the silence. James was talking about his day, a new project at work, the usual office politics. Claire nodded, hummed in the right places, but her mind was miles away, replaying Ryan's words, the intensity of his gaze. "Are you listening?" James asked, his voice sharper than usual. Claire snapped back to attention. "Of course, honey. Just a lot on my mind with school." He studied her, his brow furrowed slightly. "You seem distracted. Ever since that trip to the hardware store." A flush crept up Claire's neck. "It's nothing, James. Really." He sighed, a tired sound. "I just want us to be okay, Claire. We haven't been us, lately." He reached across the table, taking her hand. His touch was warm, familiar, comforting. And for a fleeting moment, she felt a pang of guilt, a sharp awareness of the chasm growing between them. She squeezed his hand back, a desperate attempt to bridge it. The coffee shop was all exposed brick and soft lighting, a stark contrast to the familiar diner. Claire sat across from Ryan, a latte growing cold between them. The conversation flowed easily, effortlessly, like it used to. They talked about their lives, the twists and turns, the choices made and the paths not taken. "So, you teach literature," Ryan said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Always knew you'd end up surrounded by books. Remember how you'd always have your nose in one?" Claire laughed. "And you always had sawdust in your hair." He grinned. "Some things never change." The truth of his words hung in the air. He leaned forward, his voice softer. "Claire, I never stopped thinking about you, even after all these years." Claire's breath hitched. She looked down at her hands, clasped tightly on the table. "Ryan, I'm married." Her voice was barely a whisper, a desperate plea to an unhearing wind. He reached across the table, covering her hands with his. His touch was gentle, yet firm, sending a jolt through her. "I know," he said, his eyes unwavering. "But does that mean it was the right choice?" James sat at his desk, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his tired face. He clicked through old photos, images of Claire and him, younger, happier, their smiles genuine. The cabin trip he'd suggested, the one she'd agreed to with such polite distance, was supposed to be their rekindling. But something was off. He'd seen the way her eyes darted away when he asked about her day, the subtle tension in her shoulders. And that message he'd found on her phone, open on the nightstand while she was in the shower. An unknown number, a single word, tomorrow? He knew he shouldn't have looked further, but a cold dread had settled in his stomach. He'd seen the contact name later, saved under a generic hardware store. He closed his laptop, the click echoing in the silent office. He loved Claire deeply, but a seed of doubt, once planted, could grow into a forest. The city lights blurred outside the small apartment window. Claire, younger, dressed in a faded college sweatshirt, was hunched over a textbook. Her phone buzzed. It was Ryan. "Hey, you free to talk?" she'd answered, a smile in her voice. "Just finished studying." They'd talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing. He was back in Laurelwood, helping his family after his father's illness. She was miles away, building a new life. "I miss you," he'd said, his voice raw. "More than you know." Claire's heart had ached. "I miss you too," she'd confessed. But the distance felt insurmountable, the future uncertain. She had hung up, tears welling in her eyes, knowing that letting him go was the practical choice, the responsible one, the one that hurt the most. The cabin near the hills was exactly as Claire remembered, rustic and quiet, surrounded by the hushed whispers of pine trees. James had lit a fire, its warmth casting dancing shadows on the walls. He was trying, she knew. He was trying to bring them back to where they were. They sat on the worn sofa, a comfortable silence settling between them. James reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Claire," he said, his voice soft. "What's going on?" She looked at him, truly looked at him, seeing the worry in his eyes, the subtle lines of stress around his mouth. He deserved the truth, or at least a version of it. I ran into someone from high school," she began, her voice faltering. "Ryan Carter. He's back in town." James's grip tightened imperceptibly. He didn't say anything, just waited. It brought back a lot of memories," she continued, struggling to find the right words. Of a different time. A different path. The fire crackled, the only sound filling the space. James released her hand, running a hand through his hair. "Are you telling me you're falling for him?" he asked, his voice low and laced with a pain that ripped through Claire. She didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The lake shimmered, reflecting the last streaks of twilight, just as it had all those years ago. Claire stood at the edge of the dock, the cool breeze caressing her face. Ryan appeared beside her, silent, a familiar presence. They stood there for a long time, not speaking, simply existing in the shared space, the shared history. "I told James," Claire said, finally, her voice hoarse. Ryan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "And?" He asked if I was falling for you. Another silence, pregnant with unspoken emotions. "Are you?" Ryan's voice was barely a whisper, a question that held the weight of two intertwined pasts and a precarious future. Claire closed her eyes, a lifetime of choices flashing before her. James, safe, kind, predictable. Ryan, a spark, a dangerous possibility, the echo of a forgotten dream. The truth, slant or otherwise, had to be spoken. She opened her eyes, looking directly at him. "I don't know," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "But I can't pretend anymore." Ryan turned to her, his hand slowly reaching out, brushing her cheek. "What happens now, Claire?" he asked, his thumb gently stroking her skin. The air vibrated with anticipation. The lake lapped softly against the shore, a quiet witness to a moment of profound uncertainty. Claire looked into his eyes, then back at the dark, familiar water. The quiet streets of Laurelwood held their breath. And for the first time in years, Claire Monroe felt terrifyingly, exhilaratingly undecided.